Welcome back everyone to Formula 1 Transfer Talk. Now, silly season, the Formula 1 driver transfer market kicked into gear a couple of weeks ago with Sebastian Vettel first of all announcing he will no longer be driving for Ferrari after this current season, if we have a season that is in 2020. In his place will be Carlos Sainz, who currently drives for McLaren, and going to McLaren in 2021 will be Daniel Ricciardo. The fallout of all these changes, or current changes, means that Ricciardo's seat at Renault is vacant for 2021, meaning this seat that I think is actually quite underrated, we'll talk about that a little bit later on, currently has not been filled. And it's this seat at Renault alongside Esteban Ocon, I think, could be very spicy indeed and well worth a good discussion and a good debate in today's episode. As always, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments section below. If you're looking for a bit of F1 at the moment and are desperate for any kind of content and are new around here, feel free to subscribe. But I think the best place to start today's debate would be with Renault themselves. What exactly are they looking for, and what strategy am I thinking they should take when selecting a driver alongside Esteban Ocon? Esteban, of course, is signed up with the team for 2020 and for 2021. I think a really solid driver for the team, and actually if Mercedes don't consider the option to bring Ocon back to their own team, I think Renault would do a lot of good with having Esteban within the team in the long term. Also, news today surfacing once again that the team may leave Formula 1. We've also got a bit of news about Williams that I'll discuss a little bit later on as well. However, I think Ocon, for the future of Renault, with Daniel Ricciardo out of the way, I think it would be sensible to back Esteban. Maybe a little bit early, maybe a little bit risky with that Mercedes question still looming, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to kind of assume that Ocon is the long-term option for Renault. So having someone alongside Ocon that he can learn from is certainly something that they may consider. Having someone that's going to be number 2 to Ocon is also something they may consider, which is why I kind of think it's quite fun talking about Renault, because they have so many options available, and the team as a whole is one that I believe could jump massively in 2022. I think a lot of people forget that they only came back to Formula 1 in 2016, just 4 seasons ago, and though 2019 was a backward step, overall the progress they've made has been fantastic. It's been really, really good, and I think if they can continue that trend and continue investment, which again may be difficult with everything going on at the moment, but I still think they're one of those dark horses for a big jump up to the front in 2022. So it's a seat that certainly I think a lot of drivers will take seriously, and actually it'll be very attractive to a lot of drivers. And the final thing I want to mention just before we jump into a big discussion about the drivers is that I fully believe that this seat would have gone to Antoine Hubert if the event of Spa 2019 didn't transpire the way they did. A ridiculously talented driver, won Formula 3 or GP3 as it was known back in 2018. Fantastic Grand Prix victories or Formula 2 victories in the sprint race at Paul Ricard. Again in Monaco, he was on his way to something really, really special. And even if he didn't get this Renault seat, I am certain he would have been in Formula 1 at some point. And of course, Antoine was part of the four musketeers that came through the junior ranks in karting, French karting, and that was himself, Charles Leclerc, Esteban Ocon, who's now at Renault, and our first proper candidate for this seat, and the driver I've made transparently clear I think should be the best option for Renault going forward and would be a perfect fit for the team, is Pierre Gasly. For me, this just fits so nicely, and the romantics will look at the fact that Ocon and Gasly are such great friends. They were part of that four musketeer group coming up through French karting, which is a nice little segue to Renault being a very proud French team. They wanted to bring in Ocon. I'm not sure all of it the decision wouldn't have been because he was French, but certainly it had some kind of bearing to why they chose him over Nico Hülkenberg. And I think having 2 French drivers, for them, they would love it. They would absolutely bask in that. For Pierre, it's a big chance to redeem himself from what happened at Red Bull. But I think people will still question the talent of Pierre Gasly. And I think that's where my opinions differ slightly from quite a big chunk of the Formula 1 fanbase. So I've started with Gasly because I think this is one that'll be one of the more divisive ones, so I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments section below. But what Pierre Gasly was able to prove at his tiny bit of a season at the end of 2017, his full season in 2018, and his half season at Toro Rosso in 2019, accumulating to that insane podium in Brazil with P2. And yes, you can point out that if Bottas didn't retire, if the two Ferraris didn't make contact, if Albon and Hamilton didn't make contact, he wouldn't have been there. But I still think that whole weekend he was superb, and actually the whole second half of the season, a lot of drivers would have taken that demotion pretty poorly. I mean, I don't want to single out Danny Cavia in today's video, but he seemed to really struggle that demotion from Red Bull, and Verstappen instantly winning when he was promoted to Red Bull. And ultimately Kvyat dropped out of F1, and it's only now he's rebuilding that reputation, whereas Gasly straight away took the challenge by the scruff of the neck, if you will, did super well, consistently not only beat Danny Cavia, but was scoring points, was best of the rest, fighting with the McLarens. And that's something at Red Bull we didn't really see. He wasn't that gutsy driver, and maybe it was because he had a couple of crashes in winter testing, and maybe it's because the pressure of not crashing the car was so much, he was driving so careful. Maybe it's because he didn't get on with the car. Whatever it was, if you forget that Red Bull period, he's been a really impressive driver in Formula 1. But it has got to be noted that that Red Bull period was not good. Was pretty abysmal from Pierre Gasly. But I still think the fact that he's now back at AlphaTauri, that word Toro Rosso, if you've been staying away from Formula 1 over the winter, they've changed names. I think if Albon and Verstappen are staying at Red Bull, drivers like Gasly and Danny Kvyat, you can throw him into the mix for this seat as well. We'll have a discussion in a moment after Gasly about Danny. But I think for both of those drivers, they'll be looking for an out. They'll be looking for another team that are going to take the chance, that have more of a potential to move up the grid, move in front of AlphaTauri, and to move to a team like Renault. I think there's a possibility, maybe not as much as a Ferrari or Mercedes, but there's a possibility that Renault could challenge Red Bull in 2022. And for a driver like Gasly, that redemption story to move away from the slightly toxic nature of the Red Bull family. We've seen what wonders it's done for Carlos Sainz moving to Renault, McLaren and now Ferrari. I think for Gasly that would be a brilliant next step in his career. And for Renault themselves, they're picking up a driver who is ready to redeem themselves, is ready to prove himself up against Esteban Ocon. I think that'd be a lovely little pairing for them both to develop their own skills in Formula 1 and to have a bit of a diamond in the rough for Renault to work on and to improve and to really mould their future around. And I really do believe if they had Ocon and Gasly in a team, that would be a really strong pairing in that midfield, and a pairing capable of doing really well in a championship in both the drivers and the constructors. It would be a risk considering Gasly's performances at Red Bull and considering Ocon has had a year out and hasn't really been able to massively prove himself in Formula 1 as of yet, but I still like it and I still think it would work. Danny Kvyat, I said I'd mention him, and I do want to quickly add, if he comfortably beats Gasly in 2020, and I mean if he comfortably beats him, he would also be a strong option. Podium experience in Formula 1, it doesn't sound a lot, but he does have 3 podiums to his name. Worked in a team like Red Bull for a time, could be an option, but I still think out of the two, with age on his side, and I think a little bit more speed, I would go with Pierre Gasly. Renault, of course, have their own young drivers as well, that I think is worth talking about. Though we lost Antoine Hubert last season, there are 2 other Formula 2 drivers currently in the Renault Young Driver Academy. One of those is Christian Lundgaard, and whilst I would love to say he's going to jump in Formula 2, be champion and straight into that Renault seat for 2021, in all honest truth, you never quite know how drivers are going to adapt to a Formula 2 car, and it's the same with Formula 1. I often use Alex Albon, who really struggled in his first year in Formula 2, didn't score a single podium all year long. Second year did much better, and in Formula 1 is now at Red Bull after his first season, so you never quite know how drivers are going to adapt to lower Formula cars and the jump up in class. But Lundgaard is someone who's done well in his junior career so far. several victories in Formula 3, has mixed it up with the likes of Robert Schwartzman, Marcus Armstrong, Mick Schumacher, Dan Ticktum, so certainly there's some credible drivers he's up against, but I'm not too sure if it's quite ready for the jump up to Formula 1. But like I said, if he is champion in Formula 2, Renault really have to take that option seriously. And I suppose this is a good time to quickly mention, I do believe Renault should wait until the end of 2020 to make their decision. A lot of people saying they're going to announce it over the next few weeks, the next few months. For me, it just makes so much sense to assess the likes of Gasly, the likes of Cavia, to assess how well their Formula 2 drivers are doing. And the majority of the other candidates are either out of Formula 1 completely at the moment, or out of a seat in 2021 and aren't really going anywhere. See what Mercedes do as well. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. I think Renault really have to play the field here, kind of play the game of F1 politics, the Game of Thrones of Formula 1. I really do think that would be the best course of action here. So for both Gasly and Cavia, judging which of those is better, and for their Formula 2 drivers, so we just spoke about Christian Lundgaard, but also Guan Yu Zhou gives those two an opportunity to go up against each other, and for all four of those drivers, kind of assess which has the most potential going forward. And just on the note of Guan Yu Zhou, massively impressed me in Formula 2 last year. Rookie of the Year, alongside Hubert, those two for me were the standout rookies. Schumacher did well, but Guan Yu Zhou, multiple pole positions, several podiums, and considering his junior record before Formula 2 was pretty barren, no titles to speak of, very, very impressive. Would be the first Chinese driver in Formula 1, and as such you would imagine would bring quite a lot of sponsors to the team. Has also won one of the Formula 1 virtual Grand Prix for Renault, just a slight added touch which won't make a lot of difference, but I just thought I would throw it in there for you guys. But if he can continue another season of development and finish in the top 3 of Formula 2, he needs to do that to get enough super license points to jump into Formula 1. Like Lundgaard, that's why I said he needs to be champion, because he needs to get enough super license points. But once that is in the bag, I think if you've proved yourself to be top 3 in Formula 2, you're credible enough to be in Formula 1. So Guan Yu Zhou, there's potential there, but I still think Gasly would be the best option out of all of those 4 at this moment in time. But of course, if we do eventually get racing in 2020, things could change. There's a couple of drivers, I mentioned it a second ago, that are out of contract, are not currently in Formula 1. And though I think most of these options are very unlikely, I can see why people would love them to take a seat at Renault. And I think, we're going to have to mention him. It's about time. Fernando Alonso, currently the favourite to take the seat. And whilst talk has died down over the last few weeks, of course there was murmurings that Alonso and Renault were doing a bit of flirtatious banter on Twitter. Renault putting up a post about Alonso winning in 2004, I think it was. They've now done that with Jarno Trulli, and I don't see anyone saying Trulli's coming back to Renault anytime soon. But Alonso won his 2 titles at Renault in 2005 and 6. He's Renault's last champion, he's Renault's last race winner, Renault's last podium sitter as well, which is quite an interesting one to think about. He was there in the very early stages of his career after Minardi from 2003 all the way through to 2006. Then went on a hiatus to McLaren but came back to Renault, and though there was Spygate, there was still a couple of victories thrown into the mix, and Alonso definitely was their star man. And Renault certainly could use a driver with a bit of flair, like they've got with Daniel Ricciardo, someone who is going to go the extra mile to claim a victory. And from a marketing standpoint, bringing in a driver like Alonso is going to bring so much buzz to the team, so many sponsors, but in the short term. And I wonder whether this Renault project that has been on short term pretty much since they returned to Formula 1, since they've returned, they've had a different driver lineup every single season. That's ridiculous. It started off with Magnussen Palmer, then Hülkenberg Palmer in 2017. 2018 it was Sainz Hülkenberg, 19 Ricciardo Hülkenberg, 20 it's going to be Ocon Ricciardo, and 21 it's going to change again because Ricciardo's leaving. They need longevity. And I think if you have Alonso, he's coming to the end of his career anyway if he ever returns to Formula 1. And though I think Renault is the only realistic option of an Alonso return, as I believe it's one of the only seats that will be able to challenge the top 3 in 2022, and one of the only teams that actually would happily take Alonso, I just think the team have to change their mindset with drivers. It's kind of worked over the last few years. They have gone forward, but I think what they really need now is that consistency. And it's one of those big reasons I really question why they got rid of Nico Hülkenberg. Alonso, I'm sure, if the car was capable, would deliver results. He would push forward. But as I said right at the start of today's transfer talk, if the team want to look at Ocon as their main man, which I kind of think they do, I'm not too sure bringing in Alonso would be the best course of action. Yes, it would be someone great for Ocon to learn off of, but also I think it would be, as an overall package, of detriment to Ocon, because Alonso would demand a team to pretty much be built around him, around what he likes in a car, what he likes in strategy. He would want to be that number 1 driver, and I don't think that's realistically what Renault want to give away at this moment in time. We mentioned Hülkenberg, and he is a driver on the market, and he's a driver I still believe, and I'm sorry if you're a long-term subscriber and you just want me to shut up at this point, but I believe he's good enough for F1. I really do think he's in the top 20 drivers in the world. I really do think. Maybe in the world's a bit much, but top 20 drivers for Formula 1. Really rate Nico Hülkenberg. Said it many times, was one of the best in 2018. So far in front of the rest of the midfield. Absolutely smacked the competition about. Comfortably beat Carlos Sainz, who's now at Ferrari. I cannot believe Hülkenberg is out of a drive. So, going back to Renault, in theory, would be brilliant for Hülkenberg in the sense that he's jumping into a team that are going to be competitive and again, I think could get podiums and wins. But of course, Hülkenberg doesn't have a podium, and whilst I think it's quite a weak argument, that's going to cause some fire in the comments, but I don't like the fact when people say he hasn't got a podium, because he's got plenty of P4s and he's never really had machinery to get a podium, though there has certainly been opportunities and he has bottled several, including Germany 2019, only last year. Realistically, should he have been in that position anyway? In Brazil 2012, should he have been leading the Grand Prix? No, not really, but anyway, I'll move on before I shoot myself in the foot too many times here. I think Hülkenberg is Formula 1 worthy. The issue is, though Renault would be a good car, Renault showed so much disrespect to Hülkenberg by getting rid of him. 2019 wasn't the best, but he had a hell of a lot of reliability issues, a hell of a lot of strategies that didn't go his way, and overall, it was lacklustre. He didn't perform on the level of Ricciardo, and the Renault board, I imagine, were kind of looking for a bit of a scapegoat for someone to blame for their backward step in 2019. So I can understand why they got rid of him, but for a driver who took the gamble to move to them when they weren't a strong team, when he moved to them in 2017, 2016 was rubbish, and he really did take a gamble moving from a team like Force India, who at the time were on the up. So getting rid of him, I really did think was very disrespectful, and whether Nico would want to jump back into that is completely down to him. If there was an offer on the table, I think he might take it if it's his only option to return to Formula 1. For Renault, he's going to be a consistent driver, they know him, but it's just that broken bridge whether they can fix it or not. And Hülkenberg is getting on in his career himself now. He's not as young as the likes of Cavia, of Gasly, of the Formula 2 drivers we've mentioned already. And certainly I think to bring in Hülkenberg would be a safe option, perhaps not an ambitious option for the team. And I think the final driver I'm going to talk about who's out of contract, that a lot of people are talking about potentially moving to Renault, is Sebastian Vettel. I want to do a separate transfer talk on Seb, so I won't talk about this forever. But realistically, is Renault an option for Vettel? I don't think so. I think if he wanted to have a real challenge of building a team up from the ground, he would move to a team like Aston Martin, if potentially they would want him. And I think if Vettel maybe put out a feeler to go there, I think they would potentially move on Stroll or maybe buy out Perez to bring in a 4-time world champion Sebastian Vettel. That I could see that happening. But I don't think Vettel would want to move to a half-finished project in Renault. I don't think Renault has the history that Sebastian Vettel would be invested in. And if he was looking to go to a team that are going to win or fight for a title in 2022, he wouldn't have left Ferrari. Yes, moving to Renault, he would probably be the number one driver. But I feel he's already proved himself in the midfield. He did bits at Toro Rosso back in the day. He won in a Toro Rosso. He's done that stage of his career. And though we've seen drivers like Alonso, more recently Kimi Raikkonen, jump back into the midfield to prove themselves, I don't think Vettel, with 4 world titles, realistically needs to do that. A lot of you will disagree and think that 2019 was so bad, he probably does, and I can see that point of view, that makes sense to me. But I think for Seb to decline a contract at Ferrari, they didn't not offer him one, he just didn't want to accept it. I think for him to do that, there must have been either a clear train of thought that he will retire, or there's a brand new project elsewhere for him to look at. And again, we'll talk about that in a whole separate transfer talk. But for this, for Renault, I'm not seeing it. Again, for Renault, having someone like Seb would be brilliant. But for Vettel, I don't think it'll be something that particularly interests him for the future. And the final driver I want to discuss today is Valtteri Bottas. And Bottas, for me, could be the favourite for the seat. Now, this morning we had the news that Rocket are leaving Williams, or Williams are terminating Rocket. We haven't got the full details just yet, but either way, Rocket will not be sponsoring Williams for the remainder of 2020. And there's been some doubt whether Williams will have to sell their team to remain racing over the next couple of years. And I wonder what kind of effect that will have on Mercedes and their decision with George Russell. In my 2021 driver predictions video, I was already confident that Mercedes will consider George Russell, and I think on the balance of probability may decide to take him, with Hamilton maybe only having 3 or 4 more seasons at Mercedes himself. I think bringing in Russell when they know how good the car is from 2020 makes sense to me. But Valtteri has been so good for that team, and it would be so unfair on him if they did get rid of him. And though I think he is still a very capable driver, I can understand why Mercedes would want to give Russell the chance. But I still think if they kept with Bottas, that would still be the best lineup on the grid, Hamilton and Bottas. So, if they get rid of him, where would he go? If there's a seat at Renault, he's going to be knocking. Again, there's been talk this week that Bottas is already talking to Renault if he's moved on from Mercedes. Also talking to Red Bull. And I think actually if Albon doesn't perform to the level expected of him at Red Bull, they could be very smart and bring in Valtteri Bottas. And that would be a brilliant appointment. A little bit left of field, a little bit risky, but that would be incredible. Verstappen and Bottas at Red Bull. But it would kind of go against the team's ethos of promoting youth. But for Valtteri, if he can't get in that Red Bull seat, being a team leader at Renault, for Renault to have someone who's going to come in, not cause upsets, race-winning experience, Mercedes experience, has been alongside Ocon for the last couple of years as he was Mercedes test driver, so they've already got a working relationship, and it seems to be a pretty strong relationship as well between the two of them, just ticks all the boxes. And if Valtteri is able to lead a team like he did at Williams in the start of the hybrid era, 2014 through to 2016, if he's able to do that at Renault, they could have a really strong and talented driver in Bottas leading that team forward, and it could be his proper and final opportunity to get a title. And that's going to be the big gamble, whether he feels he's more likely to win a title at Mercedes and stay there if they allow him, or he's more likely to win a title at a team where he is the number one driver. But I said it with Carlos Sainz, I can understand why he moved to Ferrari for victories now, and for Bottas, if he moves to Renault like Ricciardo did away from Red Bull, there's no guarantee they're going to move to the front, and it would certainly be a risk. But if he's gone from Mercedes, if Red Bull don't want him, for Bottas that would be perfect, and I think for Renault that would be a mighty good steal for that midfield. So for me, if Russell does move to Mercedes, Renault just get Bottas straight away, get him into that team. If not, I think Pierre Gasly is a brilliant option for the team. And that is your lot for this week's episode of Formula 1 Transfer Talk. I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. Sorry if I was a little bit hay fevery today. Also, the magpies in the background were screaming right at the beginning of the video, but it's boiling hot, so I've had to have the window open. So if you heard some weird noises, apologies for that. But I'd love to know your thoughts again in the comments section below. Over the next few weeks, there will be more transfer talks. They're some of my favourite videos to do, and I've got some very nice additions lined up for you, including Sebastian Vettel and some future drivers from Formula 2. Should be a lot of fun. Keep your eyes on the F1 debate show. I'm doing a bit of a project with them today, which should be fun. And also on Sunday, I will be live with Sean, the F1 Word, at 5 o'clock on his channel if you want to hear some more Formula 1 nonsense. That's my piece. Thank you all for watching. Subscribe if you are new and you've made this far. If you've made it this far and you're not subscribed, come on. I hope you enjoyed anyway, as always, and I hope to see you all in the next one.